Hi friends, this is Josh from Narrate. This past weekend, Narrate continued in the series I've Got Questions with a message titled The Bible, Recipe Book, or Compost File. In addition to the sermon, this podcast includes a portion of the gathering called Gather and Scatter. In this Gather and Scatter, Hannah and Adam talk about summer teams and some transitions happening on staff. Enjoy!
Good morning. It's good to see you here today. If we have not met, my name is Hannah and this is Adam. In a moment, we will continue worshiping through giving. So if that is something you take ownership in, prepare for that now. If not, just let those buckets go right on by. Here at Narrate, we are all about gathering and scattering. Gathering is what we do here on Sunday mornings at Grant Street, and we have a lot of volunteers every Sunday who work really hard to make this a welcoming and engaging experience for everyone. And then the rest of the week is about scattering. We like to get outside, get into our community, and serve people where they're at.
Yeah, so recognizing that it's kind of day one of the summer season, or at least it's the first Sunday in June, one of the things that we've tried to do every year, and is speak to the summer culture around here. And we recognize many of you, this is your maybe your first summer with us, and so just kind of wanted to kind of establish a few things, invite a couple things, and that is, first of all, we recognize that summer is a unique season, and that many of us live in Montana because of summer in Montana. And with that in mind, we say, like, go, camp, do your thing. There's not going to be a sign on the curb when you get back that's some kind of shaming message about God not taking a vacation from you. Like, is kind of the way we've always tried to frame that. And yet at the same time, having said that and just allowing, I've talked to several people, like, I haven't been here in 4 weeks, I haven't been here in 5 weeks. I'm like, yeah, we kind of saw that coming because the weather was so brutal. We get that has, or the winter was so brutal, that's going to have an opposite effect in the summer. And so we allow that and welcome that and embrace that. And at the same time, try to establish but the reverse is also true, and that is that you have our word, that the staff and the volunteer teams, we're not going to punt our way through the summer. It's not going to go from like 3 services to 2. It's not going to go from a full band to Kate on a ukulele. Like we're not going to do any of those things. We are going to continue to work hard and serve hard and try to create gatherings that are helpful and engaging, no matter where you're at there. So there's a both and we just kind of wanted to say that, lest we just get caught thinking that you already understand that. But that, of course, is also only made possible by people who do volunteer, and so Hannah wants to speak just a second to those of you who maybe have been contemplating getting involved but haven't yet.
So if you're even thinking about getting involved, we'd love to have you and help round out our summer schedule. There are sign-up sheets at the Gather Scatter table. Just go ahead, jot your name and info down, and then you're going to want to check which team you're interested in learning more about. One of the staff or myself, we'd love to take you to lunch or coffee and just give you a better idea of what it looks like to serve with us here on Sundays. It's a lot of fun. So go ahead and visit the Gather Scatter table on your way out.
Yeah, and then also speaking to summer and transition, you may have seen emails or Facebook posts that speak to some transition on staff, and it just felt time to finally kind of speak to that from the stage. So there's a couple of things happening this summer. The first is, we're transitioning 2 staff members who are moving on to other things. The first one is Alyssa McCarl, and many of you know her, especially if you have kids and Narrate kids, because she's a rock star down there. She's been working with Jenny as her assistant, but she's far more than an assistant, though there's nothing wrong with being an assistant, right? How many times could I say that without offending everybody in the room? She works really hard, has done a fantastic job. She's been with us a year. She is going to amp up her school time and hopefully get to Missoula to finish her education degree. So she's leaving in July at some point. And as we looked at that transition, the council and management team went, this is probably our best opportunity to take that 20-hour-a-week role and grow it into what we hope eventually will become a full-time role, but at least we'll start off as a 3/4-time role. And so what we're doing is, rather than have Jenny lead the whole thing and have an assistant, we're just going to take that department, because Narrate Kids has become gigantic. Maybe it's doubled in size since Jenny started. I'm not entirely sure. But what we're going to do is Jenny is going to continue to lead the kindergartners through the 5th graders, and do so with all the awesomeness and excellence that she already has in place. And then we are going to hire an early childhood leader to take over infants through 5-year-olds. And the idea there is, let's get another leader on the team who can do lunches and coffee and hang out with people and develop relationship and bring creative excellence to that whole department. And so I suppose those applications are out now. Kate is one leading in that whole endeavor. And so if you're interested or might know somebody, that's her email. Incidentally, another thing that we've done is Kate has received a promotion without a pay raise. kinda, right? Like, that's not entirely true. But anyway, what Kate is doing now is, we've been kind of working on this for a couple of years. Kate's role is now staff support, because I don't provide any. So we thought, well, we better get someone in there to support the staff. So basically all this, she's working much more directly with all the staff now. That we started that experiment with Hannah. And so Hannah technically works for Kate and answers to Kate. And it's been an awesome dynamic. And so we've kind of changed that for the whole staff. So she's leading the hires. Kate is. She does everything. If you ever wonder, like, well, not everyone. Anyway. And then the other hire that we're doing is, so Josh, who has done an excellent job with students over these last couple years, and the creative production team, he, when we hired him, had just finished an education degree, wanted to teach in a school, and it's time for him to go do that, he's thinking. And so he would ideally like to get to Texas, where his family is, and end up in a classroom. So our student director / creative production director is leaving again, probably around the same timeline, late July-ish. And similarly, we took that and went like, this is our chance to finally hire a full-time student director. Like, we've been building towards this, and it seems that we maybe have grown just enough to make it happen budgetarily. Because we think that it's time that we double down on the energy that we're pouring into students, especially to develop the relational culture of all that. That in my head, Tuesday and Wednesday night is an excuse to have enough relationship with a student to go to their game or grab an ice cream with them or interact with them on a personal level. I think when you start examining your own relationship with Jesus, the wheel started to turn because of some personal relationship. And so we're committed to however long of a process that takes to identify a person who could really get excited about taking what's been put in place and building on that in that relational direction, and not putting on that person the creative production side. So Josh kind of has 2 full-time jobs. So what we've done with the creative production stuff is we've taken that off of that youth director, at least theoretically at this point, and we want to hire an intern. Parenthetically means we don't have any money, but we have a job. Kind of. Actually, what we think is that Kate is one of the best leaders in the whole world, and that somebody who aspires to lead music for a church and lead the arts departments for a church would do well to come learn and work under her for a couple of years. And the way we've been saying it is, come do that for a couple of years, and if we can't afford to hire you full-time, we could point you to about 40 churches who will. So those 3 different roles, all of which Kate would be your contact there, and we're excited, and hopefully that helps everybody kind of know, like, what is going on here? That's what's going on.
Thanks, Adam.
So what we get to do this morning, and really these next 2 weeks, is wrap up this conversation that is we started way back on Easter called I've Got Questions. And as I said in an email this last week, I'm really hesitant to use the word wrap up, because to me that brings back memories of 5th grade when you're wrapping up the school year, and what that meant was finding Nemo or something. And it's not at all what I want to do here. I think these last couple of weeks, quite honestly, at the risk of being braggadocious, I think this is the real, here's why it matters type of content. And so just by way of quick review, let's kind of just get up to speed where we've been, and then we'll continue forward, which, by the way, what we're going to do later in the month is start a conversation about anger and contempt and forgiveness and the simplicity of those things. So I don't think it'll be a relevant series at all, but we are excited for it. But where we started was on Easter, and that was where that video was first kicked off, where we just observed that Bartimaeus, if we're being honest, he got some things about Jesus really right, and he got some things wrong. And what we observed is that what he got right was trust, and what he got wrong was some of the cerebral, intellectual knowledge stuff about Jesus. And we just use that as a springboard to go, wait a minute, what if sometimes we overvalue getting Jesus right, and we undervalue trusting him? And that's where we're going to end this whole conversation next week, when we ask questions like, why is Job in the Bible, and why are some of these struggles there? But then from there, in the second week, we started dealing with the apparent tension between faith and science in the Bible. And we started by saying, what if the Bible is an ancient book? And what if it's an act of communication? And if we can acknowledge those things, then what we begin to acknowledge is that any form of communication becomes dated over time, which would mean that we would start coming up against the idea that the Bible was written for us but not to us, and therefore to make sense of it requires that we begin to deal with context and culture. From there, we moved into the big kind of gotcha question, and that was, if evolutionary theory is correct, does that disprove the existence of God? And we want to just deal with that one head on, and we chased that question that week. You may remember we used Sully and that whole interaction of what happened with his airplane to ask this question, is causation a zero-sum game? In other words, does everything from tragedy to victory, from cancer to getting a good parking spot, is it explainable either by God or by science, or is it in fact a blend of the two? From there, we took on what I think is likely to be, and those who I trust are telling me is the most divisive theological issue of my lifetime and of many of our lifetimes, and that is that we're Adam and Eve historical people. Because the more you sit with that, the more you see there are some massive implications if they are, and there's some massive implications if they aren't. We talked about 4 views and tried not to take a stance, but just go like, here's the way people are thinking about this. Then we talked in video form, which was an experiment that we had some fun with, where we just said like, okay, there's some irony to the fact that Christianity is perceived to be anti-science. And if nothing else, it's ironic because the worldview Jesus brought to the surface was very radical. It was a worldview that said that God is ordered, not chaotic, and that creation, that the physical world is good, not bad. That, historically, we know is what gave birth to the scientific age. Because prior to that, the spirituals would say that the physical was bad and that the gods were chaotic. And so it was Jesus' assertion that that wasn't accurate that caused people to want to start studying creation and to see it as worship when they did. This week I want to ask the question, what is the Bible? Now, I realize there's a book out now by Rob Bell that is, I'm sure, thoughtful. I just want to say I had the title before he had the book. Though I have no doubt that he probably influenced me years ago through a blog post. But it's not his content that I'm using here. But it seems to me that the real issue here is if you were to critique this series, or one way to critique this series up until this point would be to say, we've effectively said what the Bible isn't, but maybe haven't as effectively said what it is, right? Because we've worked hard to go, wait a minute. What if the Bible isn't trying to do science? Like, what if that's not what the Bible is doing? And in fact, what if when the Bible does do science, it's not because it's trying to do science, it's because it's using science of its day to make a bigger point. And to a less extent, less directly, we've asked the question, what if the Bible's not trying to do history? Now that might be a little more troubling. But at the very least, what we have to recognize is that our understanding and priority for history is different than the ancients. That moderns and pre-moderns do history differently. In a modern mindset, history's purpose is chronology and accuracy of detail. If you were to log on to CNN or Fox News today, you would see some chronological, factual bullet point thing of that horrible tragedy that unfolded in London this weekend. We like history that goes A to B to C to D and gets the facts right. This isn't a religious statement. Pre-moderns didn't treat history that way. Pre-moderns were more focused on story and how story shaped and formed identity. You do it. You'll tell a story. And you'll think to yourself as you're telling the story, wait a minute, did I just exaggerate that point? I mean, was it her that said that or him that said that? Did I just get those? Was it that day? I mean, did I even say it at all or did someone else ask that question? And you think to yourself, well, it doesn't matter. Why? Because it's the bigger story that matters. Like, it doesn't ultimately matter whether it was 2 feet of snow or it was just cold outside. The point is, your dad had it rough when he was young, right? That's kind of how this thing happens. That's the way moderns did history. So, the question again, if the Bible's not trying to do science and it's not trying to do history, the question becomes, what is it? And here I think we got to be careful and simply acknowledge there's landmines everywhere on this one. Because the trick is, every one of us in the room showed up this morning with an opinion on that. This isn't one of those topics where you're like, I bet you never thought about this, so I'm going to mess with you. This is one of those topics where everyone in the room has some negative or some positive opinion about what the Bible is. And as if that weren't complicated enough, every one of our opinions has evolved several times over the last 5 years. So not only do you have strong belief and opinion about what the Bible is, you probably disagreed with you 5 years ago, which makes talking about this extraordinarily difficult, but maybe less so if we just simply acknowledge those as facts. That for some of you, if we knew your story, we would flinch when we heard the word Bible too, because of the way you've been treated under the guise of the Bible. And for some of you, if we knew your story and the impact the Bible has had on your life, we would probably better value it because it's a major facet of how God entered into your life. For some of you, you have respect for the Bible, admiration for it even. It's why you're a part of a local church. And yet you see it maybe like one of the more sophisticated sciences where your approach to it is because you're aware of the fact that there's 100 churches teaching 100 different things about the Bible this morning. And so your approach is to go, you got to leave that to the experts and the professionals. I'll read a little snippet every once in a while. For some of you, the Bible is God. And this can become a very difficult thing for people like myself, evangelicals in particular, to confess. But if we're not careful, our admiration for the text leads us to a place where we think that so long as I've got up in the morning and read my Bible that day, anything else I might do or say to someone else is all bonus. And what's ironic is then we make fun of people from more liturgical traditions who say the same thing about going to church or going to confession. And it brings to the surface this idea that we're all in danger of worshiping the wrong things. So this whole topic, and I think we probably have a lot in common in that we have opinions and they change constantly, and sometimes it's perturbing, and sometimes it's cute, and sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes it's just plain annoying. This is what happened to me this last fall. In fact, some of you know that what happened this last year was that the council gave me permission to go back to George Fox, where I graduated from grad school, to take one class a semester, which has been awesome, because what I didn't know is, remember when you were in college and you would see a class that you actually wanted to take, and they would say, no, you can't take that. You'd be like, why? Well, because it's not a part of your degree program. You have to take this other class. And you're like, but I don't want to take that class. And you're like, but you can't take it. What I've learned now that I've done this is they let me come back as an alum. I have my degree, so I just get to cherry pick whatever class I want. It doesn't matter because I'm not going for a degree. It's awesome. You should do it someday. So last semester in the fall, actually, I took a biblical theology class, and it messed with me. A lot of the ideas and questions that led to this series came to the surface in that class. And so when I went back in February, part of my design, too, was the relationships with the professors, and there's a couple that you're going to get to meet one of them. He's going to be here this summer to speak. I can't wait. I'm realizing have become hugely formative on my thinking. Well, one of them his name is Dr. Stephen Delamarter. We've talked about him in the past. He's this awesome Old Testament scholar who has a great relationship with Jesus, is also a scholar among scholars, has been with some Egyptian manuscripts that few people get to, has been with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I don't mean like the digital version, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. I took Old Testament from him when I was in grad school, and one of the things he did in that class was he started to share some of the Bible's dirty laundry with us. It wasn't to undermine its value, but to be real. And he would just start to point to passages and go, check this out. This is in the Old Testament. And guess what? It's also in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it looks like maybe we stole it from there. And he would ask these kind of unnerving questions about source and things like that. Well, the last exercise he did with us in class, face-to-face, was he had us group up in these kind of same denominational affiliation small groups. He had us identify our denomination or association's doctrinal statement of the Bible, and then he had us talk about it, send us to coffee shops. And here would be an example of one of those doctrinal statements. I just grabbed Billy Graham's off his website because it seemed like a pretty middle-of-the-road example. But Billy Graham's website says this: we believe the Bible to be the inspired, the only infallible and authoritative Word of God revealing the love of God to the world. What he had us do was take those statements, go talk about them, and begin to observe the vocabulary in there and talk about why certain words were used. To be honest with you, it was unnerving. It was uncomfortable. But here's why I wanted to take him to lunch in February. Because at the end of that dialogue, and we were all a little messed up and a little encouraged and a little like, I don't know what to do anymore. At the end of that dialogue, I raised my hand and I said, okay, Dr. Delamarter, planting a church was at the forefront of my mind at this point. I said, what do we do with this in our local churches? I'll never forget, he's this large, very sincere, incredibly intelligent man, and there was this long, pregnant pause, only he wasn't pregnant. And he said, first he kind of choked back some emotion. He didn't cry, but you know that thing you do? He's keeping that in. As Kate would say, his emotion was right at the surface. And he looked at us and he said, you be very, very careful, because you could shipwreck people's faith with this information. It was for that reason that I wanted to take him to lunch. He ended up buying me lunch at a Chinese restaurant that does not compare to the Yatsen in East Helena, so you don't have to go to Portland for the Chinese food. I wanted to ask him, Dr. Delamarter, knowing that you know all the dirty laundry and you have a strong relationship with Jesus and you value the Bible, what do you want your grandkids to know about the Bible? Right, let's just cut through the academic stuff. Let's just get to what I'm trying to get to this morning, the practical, everyday. What do you want your grandkids to believe about the Bible? And he, being a classic thinker, he in turn asked me two questions. He didn't give me an answer. He said, Adam, I think there's two questions that are at the very base of everything you're asking here. The first one is this: do our claims of the Bible have to answer to the Bible? So I think what we're getting at here, and even if we're going to disagree on the answer, if we can just acknowledge that this is what we're getting at, this helps. Does what we say the Bible is actually have to be held up against what the Bible itself says that it is? Because see, where this gets to is many of the words and many of our denominational statements aren't in the Bible. They're extra biblical words that we use to describe it. And I immediately went back to the text that he really messed with us with in seminary, in 2 Timothy. This would be one of the more forthright verses in the Bible of its own proclamation of itself. And it says this: all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And you can see there's some distinct vocabulary there, but you also notice that there's some vocabulary in things like Billy Graham's statement that frankly aren't in there. And I remember him saying in class, you guys, what I don't understand is why doesn't what the Bible says about itself, why isn't that enough? What it says is it's perfect for helping us know who we are and whose we are and how we relate to this God. What it says is that it's perfect in helping us know the paths of righteousness, which speaks to the fact that God uniquely made humans for power and wants them to know how to use it, and they can't do so outside of his wisdom. I remember him saying, like, why aren't we just comfortable saying that the Bible has been perfect in my life for helping me know God and try to follow him? But at any rate, it creates a conversation of, do our claims of the Bible have to answer to the Bible? And then his second question, and I quite frankly think this is the best question in all of my research and learnings for what led to this series. It was simply this: how does the Bible score its truth points? Now, this one I think you could mess with for a while, but his point was, he just said, Adam, let's just be honest. If we're of the conviction that the Bible scores its truth points by being scientifically accurate, that is going to create certain kinds of approaches to the Bible. And certain arguments will be out of bounds. And if the Bible scores its truth points by being historically accurate, then that's going to force us to believe certain things about the historicity of the Bible, and that's going to lead the conversations down a certain path. And if we think the Bible scores its truth point in some other way, then that's going to create a different kind of conversation. To which I would say, and I'm not asking you to adopt my opinion, is that the Bible scores its truth point, and it's what 2 Timothy says, that it's perfect in helping us know this God, at least what we need to know, and trying to follow him. Now, there's another way to go after this. A guy named Tim Mackey, this great thinker at Western Seminary in Portland, he uses M.C. Escher and one of his famous drawings to unpack this question. Now, you may be familiar with this drawing. It's the hands drawing hands. I don't know actually what it's actually called. I should have looked. You just Google hands drawing hands, and boom, there you go. This drawing is intended to capture paradox. Like when you say, which came first, the chicken and the egg? That's what this drawing is trying to do. Because, of course, what you see as you stare at it is that if you eliminate one hand, what have you effectively done? The drawing doesn't allow you to have one hand. Do you see that? You can only have both hands, 0 or 2. Those are your only options. And some would say that the historic, ancient, orthodox understanding of the Scripture is that it is the Word of God and the words of people. And that part of this discussion and where it becomes heated is sometimes, and maybe you're here now, maybe you've been here, I know I have, sometimes we have a view that says there's only one hand and it's the hand of God. This is what some would call the golden tablets drop down from heaven view. That the Bible is only the result of something God did supernaturally. Rembrandt captures this view in a rather famous painting of his. This is called St. Matthew. That person there is the gospel writer Matthew. And that person over his right shoulder is an angel. So what story is Rembrandt telling us about what it means that the Scriptures are God-inspired? It's a single-hand view that God whispered in the ears of the authors of the Scriptures, and they wrote them down, and therefore we don't need to mess with anything. That there's no culture. You see where this view takes us. And then there's a second view. They would say, well, no, it's not the hand of God, it's just the hand of people. And this sounds a lot like literary criticism in college, right? And it's not that there's no place for it, but it's an approach that says, no, this is just written by people, and if we better understood their context, then we better understand the Bible. Which leads to this question, what if the ancients are right? What if Jews and Christians for over 2,000 years, the Jewish piece anyway, are right in their assertion that you can't take it down any further than two hands? That the Bible was written for us, but not to us. That there's God's hand and the hand of people. This last Monday, as we kind of shift into a little bit different way to think about this perhaps, we did the Zach Zenner camp. Thank you. For those of you who are part of volunteering there, sorry that we wasted some of your time. We pride ourselves in not doing that. We had more help than we needed, but we had no way of knowing that. But the good news is you got to see Zach's quads. And you missed out on that on Sunday morning. And let me tell you, they were robust. I asked him, I think it was Sunday night actually, I was like, so what is your squat routine? Because it became pretty obvious as soon as the guy put athletic shorts on that His legs are massive. And he said, well, we do 5 sets of 3. We go up 50 pounds a set. My last set, just before we came to Helena, was 395. So, this guy has some quads. So at least you got to see that. Well, I got there. Many of us got there at about 7:15. And at about 8:30, I had this realization. I had my mug of tea and my water bottle. And it was at the Carroll College practice football field. And I had this realization of wait a minute. They gave us the field, not a bathroom. And you're planning to be there at noon, and you have this I better start pumping the brakes on the liquids, right? Because this is going to get uncomfortable. And so I did. And at about 10 o'clock that morning, when you have that realization where you're like, I can make it, but it'll be a more fun walk if I don't make myself make it, right? That feeling. I know I'm not the only one that does this. And so I started kind of eyeing, the shrubbery, and is there a place that someone could sidle over to and inconspicuously not get arrested while relieving oneself? And decided that wasn't going to fly. There was an outhouse on the other side of the field that my son pointed out, but I'm like, that's like the walk of shame. I'm going to walk all the way across this practice football field. People are going to watch me walk into the outhouse. Then I'm going to walk out, having not washed my hands, and shake everybody's hand and say, hey, thanks for volunteering. So I didn't do that. Then I noticed there was a dorm, what I thought was a dorm, right off the edge of the parking lot, and someone had propped the door open. So I was like, this is perfect. And I'm figuring what you're figuring. Someone's doing a deep clean, school's out. So I kind of walked in there, but I'm a catastrophizer by nature, and so immediately I started thinking about all the things that could go wrong in this scenario, namely the angry custodian who doesn't want people in his building right now. And so I kind of tiptoed down the hallway, and I got to, I figured somewhere halfway down this hallway there's got to be a bathroom. This is a dorm, for crying out loud. And I pushed open this door, and it was mauve. I wouldn't call it pink. It was probably pink in 1971, but it's mauve now. So, okay, that's not going to work. So next door over, I saw that there were 2 bathrooms. I'm thinking, this is the guys, right? And push it open. No, it's mauve too. And that's when it occurred to me, no, this is a Catholic school. They don't have co-ed floors on the dorm. And so I just stood there, literally one room in the bathroom. You could see showers off in the distance, and thinking to myself, there's really no problem here. But if there is, this goes bad very, very quickly, right? So I left. I'm like, I can't do it. I just couldn't do it. I got 10 steps away from the bathroom. I thought, this is ridiculous. Just go to I could hear my wife. Just go to the bathroom. So I went back, and this is the dumb. It was one of those ideas you didn't realize how dumb it was till after you did it. But I pushed the door open, and then I did one of these, to try to look underneath the stall, which somehow doesn't make anything any better if there is somebody in the bathroom. So I left and decided, well, maybe the second floor is the guys' floor. Maybe they stagger them floor by floor. Got to the end, went upstairs, went to the second floor. Nope, they're all mauve. Left the bathroom, or left the building, just thought, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And then looked across the parking lot, and the other building, which it doesn't take a genius to figure out, is also a dorm building now at this point. Its door was also propped open, so I walked over there, walked in. It wasn't mauve, and all was well. But the thing that stuck with me was that over the girls in this dorm room, which, you got bathrooms and mirrors and showers and all that stuff. Someone had taken, the letters that people would use in a classroom. And you go now to your kid's classroom and you're like, that's amazing. They still use the same font and art that they used when I was in school. Those boards that teachers work so hard on. Someone had written kind of in a rainbow shape above the girls' bathroom, "You're beautiful." Yeah, that's every service. There's some female who went oh. And you can kind of see what they're doing there, right? The reality is, if you could get a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old female living in this environment who gets so many messages from so many places, if you could get her to rewire her thinking and think of herself in a way that's reflected in that text, you would change her future, right? And I just got to think of what if that's what the text is telling us it is? Ironically, closely connected to that, a friend of mine got jolted, and by that I don't mean that bad soda from the 80s. Now energy drinks taste good. Those were just horrid. But they got a message that, you thought you had something conquered, and then this thing out of your control happens, and suddenly you're all messed up and all emotional and all anxious again. And I happened to be with this friend when this happened, and so he's like, hey, can we go for a walk? And so we went, we just went for this walk, and he's telling me everything that had happened. I'm like, oh man, that would be tough. That's brutal. Yeah. And he's kind of walking. Not that anyone necessarily even at fault, but just this information was hurtful. And he's like, what do I do? Again, I'm not thinking about this message. I'm not thinking about this weekend. And I'm just kind of I was like, well, I don't know what you do. I'm not a therapist, but I know some good ones. You should see them. But I said, here's the only thing I've learned, because and this person knows I struggle with anxiety and I've worked hard at it. And I said, here's the best thing I've learned is that what I have to do when I catch myself realizing I've been jolted, listen, the reality of emotional intelligence is your emotional brain is going to, on occasion, override your rational brain, but emotional intelligence is closing that gap. And what I've learned to do is the moment my rational brain tells me I'm being emotional, to plug in a different tape. And we talked about this last summer, to kind of pre-diagnose the problem and memorize truth that I know I'm not capable of rationally coming up with then, but if I've memorized something that represents what I know to be right and true and beautiful and good and represent who I want to live and how I want to value, that I can plug that in, and if I loop it, and now I'm just internally saying over and over this thing that I've memorized. And for me with anxiety, the big one is 2 Timothy 1:7, which says, "For I did not give you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." And I loop that, and it doesn't take me long, and I'm back between the lines. And so I said to my friend, here's what I would do if I were you. And I've got stuff I need to do this with in my own life right now. But here's what I'd do if I was you is, in a couple hours, when your heart rate's settled, I think you need to open the text and identify a truth. You need to find some truth that you know you can trust in those jolted moments, and you need to memorize it so that you can loop it. And then I even said to him, and I don't even think it has to come from the Bible, but here's the catch for me, because I think all truth is God's truth, but here's the catch for me. There's nothing more reliable than the text, so why would I screw around with that? And I wondered, what if that's the fatherly intention of this God who by two hands has provided the text for us? As he knows what it's like to be a 17-year-old girl in a college campus. And he knows what it's like to have kids, and he knows what it's like to be angry, and he knows what it's like to struggle with any number of different issues. And what he's provided is the stories of people who have been there and the truths that are bigger than the circumstances, or at least help in the midst of them. What if the text, despite all the things that we don't necessarily know about what it is the best insight on what it means to be human and what it means to be God? See, if all of that's true, here's what stands out to me. Then any time spent becoming biblically literate is time well spent. Because as I'm going I need to find a verse on anger, guess what I don't have to do? I don't have to play Bible roulette and go well, I hope this one's about anger. I know, okay, let's go to Matthew 5, and let's pull some of those texts from there. There's another guy, Walt Brueggemann, who's this respected Old Testament theologian, and he was plagiarized by Pete Enns. And one of the great things about being a plagiarist is when you start seeing that you're plagiarizing people who plagiarized. So on this one, I was glad to call him out. But Walt Brueggemann has this analogy of a recipe book versus a compost pile. See, what he points out is that oftentimes we treat the Bible like a recipe book. And let's just stop and think about how a recipe works, right? What you do is the recipe says, do these 6 things in this kind of increment, in this order, and if you do so, you'll get this result. And then you start cooking and you go, I didn't get that result. It's got nothing like that result. And what does the recipe book say? It says, well, then you did it wrong. Go back and do it again. And if we're not careful, he points out, this is the way we treat the text. This is the way we treat the Christian life. That if you ended up at divorce, then you did it all wrong. It was all in your control. And if you ended up at some kind of tragedy or death or illness, then you did the recipe wrong. But what if, he says, we see the Bible more like a compost pile? Now, maybe you don't compost. I don't. But I know enough to know it's kind of gross. In fact, I've got a friend who told me a few years ago that when the compost pile stalls, you just urinate in it. I'm and then you eat it, right? That's essentially what you're doing with a compost pile is kind of gross and kind of embarrassing. There's stuff in, nobody's hey, so what are you going to have for your centerpiece at your wedding? Compost piles, little miniature compost piles. No one does that, right? Why? Because they're gross and they're embarrassing and they're weird. The Bible's got some weird stuff too, but a guy who sacrifices his daughter. It's got some weird stuff about a boat and all these animals that got onto it. It's got some weird stuff. But you know what else a compost pile has? Life. That's the irony of composting, isn't it? That process produces the nutrients that make life possible. For some of you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is your experience with the text and why you've committed so much energy to making sure that you can speak intelligently of it without sounding naive, because what you can't argue with is the fact that the nutrients of the text have promoted and stimulated your life. that you know God because of that pile and that bag of mystery and confusion. See, for me, like you, I suspect my opinion of the Bible has changed a lot over the last 19 years since I took interest in it. But one thing that hasn't changed is its undeniable impact on the outcomes of my life. See, the irony of this series was I think that it could be construed as undermining the veracity and validity of the text because we're saying all these things that isn't, but my purpose, our purpose, is actually the opposite. To go, wait a minute, maybe if we acknowledge all the things that isn't, maybe if we acknowledge all the complication, the fact that it is kind of a compost pile and parts of it are pretty embarrassing and you can try to dress it up and make it look good, but really you just discredit it in your attempts to defend it, maybe if we could do that, we could also get closer to it and recognize, but that book, because of the God who uses it, will change your life. The reason why I say I don't think this is like Finding Nemo at the end of 5th grade is because I think the real challenge here is, what's the role of the scriptures in your life? Do you believe that time spent there will produce the nutrients that will make marriages and parenting and finances and emotional health better? And if so, and you don't even know where to start, there's a great staff and even more awesome owners who would love to help navigate that with you. You know, this morning we're going to also give you a chance to take communion. We have elements here, and up there, and it's a historical story of a God whose love was relentless, of a God who gave of himself for us, of a God who says, here's the deal. The secret is grace and forgiveness. That's what you're looking for. So we'll have elements here, and up there. You can dip. We just ask that you don't sip because we're kind of weird that way. I'll pray. God, thanks, as weird as it is to say, for this book. Thanks for the scriptures. Thanks for the truths and the stories and the history that they contain. Thanks for the empty tomb and the occupied cross. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.